Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out. We invited you all to come out and kind of hear about an overview of another initiative that we're doing here at the Broward Sheriff's Office, really in response to what the community want, what their expectations have been. And this is really driving behind a new model or premise that I've been pushing since being the commander of this organization when it comes to accountability, transparency, and inclusion. Inclusion is fundamental. Having the community get involved in the activities that we're doing, the policies that we're making, the engagements we're trying to have to earn and continue to keep the public's trust. This really is driving behind what occurred in Minneapolis. The murder of George Floyd ended up echoing across this entire country. Much needed calls for police reform were echoed from Black Lives Matter and many other civic groups out there demanding that they not only be heard, but they would see action and response from their leaders. And as the chief law enforcement officer for this county, much of that falls on my shoulders in terms of this agency and what are we doing to answer that call. Yesterday we launched the orientation aspect for a social justice task force. The social justice task force was something that we had received from the community in terms of what they expected. The idea was to bring a collective group of civic leaders from across this county and bring them in-house as part of this task force to help us look at things that we can do to build that trust, things that we can do to help respond more effectively to the community's expectation when it comes to use of force, as well as what are we doing for civic engagement to uplift this community. I talk oftentimes about this organization is comprised of roughly 5,700 employees and we spread across roughly 1,300 square miles. There is very few organizations, if any, that matches our span or our ability to reach every part of this community. And so we looked over the last few weeks and gone through an early vetting process about what is the construct behind this social justice task force, what type of membership and inclusion we want to have. And I was happy to appoint Captain Renee Peterson to lead this up as it is going to be part of our neighborhood support team, which we launched last year. It falls within that purview of having a collective body of people working together to unite our community. In addition, she'll be supported by having the Honorable Judge Julio Gonzalez, who chairs up our Professional Standards Committee. We were proud to bring him in last year to be part of this organization. And between those two and their experiences and professionalism, along with the membership that we have behind us that really represents a cross-section of both religious leaders, activists, and a lot of different professional standings that I think is going to make us very strong. With that, I will say this is part of a new paradigm, something that's really vital for us to be successful as an organization. We're not going to be able to do everything on our own. I think for us to have a dismissive approach that, yeah, we took a lot of aggressive stances last year. We changed a culture. We put forth a lot more accountability. We even introduced new things such as our use of force review board, working with the FBI and the reporting process that they established back in 2019, and a multitude of things we've done internally. But we work for the people. And in order for us to be successful, the people have to be part of this organization. So I'm excited about where we're headed with this social justice task force. What I'd like to do is maybe pause for a second, take a few questions, and then also give Captain Peterson an opportunity, as well as the Honorable Judge Gonzalez, to speak on what their expectations are and what their viewpoint is in terms of the success or the importance of having a successful social justice task force. I don't want to confuse the two. As the county is currently working to design a civilian review board, which I support, and Julio Gonzalez, our judge, is actually part of that process. That development will have more considerations to examine the type of things that are occurring across this county, not just with BSO, but any law enforcement involvement in use of force. That construct is still happening. That's not the focus of this task force. The Social Justice Task Force and how we are embodying this process and building it up is beyond use of force. There are so many more social issues that impact our ability to perform and how we perform with the community. So one of the things that will occur here is a lot of examination of how we use our funds to engage the community, the things that we can do in terms of building bonds with the community, whether it be community projects, involvements, things of that nature. But there will be some policy considerations, absolutely. We're not going to dismiss anything that may come up in this task force related to, hey, we need to pivot. Something with our use of force isn't as tight as we thought it was. In terms of traffic stops, maybe there's something we can adjust. there's a multitude of things we're going to touch on, but they will not cross over lines in terms of what the Civilian Review Board is going to establish. Naturally, it's going to happen. So to give you an example, just a scenario, if we can play a game for a second there. If the Social Justice Task Force is meeting on issues related to misconduct by a law enforcement official and what can we do to mitigate that, and there's a use of force case that is going to be discussed as the kind of, hey, this is the scenario that we faced last week. This occurred. What are you doing as an organization, Sheriff, to rectify these things? We can look at our policies. There may be something that we did not do and missed, and that Social Justice Task Force will bring that up. And then, of course, through Captain Peterson and the judge, that will come to my table and say, hey, sir, you know what? Regardless of all the things that you put in place in terms of early warning systems, use of force review board, accountability, this was a really good idea that came out of the Social Justice Task Force. We need to consider that for policy implementation. So I think it's going to be a really good a good concept, because there's no limit really onto what those discussion points can be. We had 2 members who put in a request very early on when I first had this discussion. Right after the George Floyd murder, we had just a town hall type of approach, brought in the community, start listening. 2 representatives from the Black Lives Matter Alliance came in. They were very adamant about, look, Sheriff, if you're going to do this Social Justice Task Force, we want to be a part of it. We want to have some discussion, consideration, and not scream from the outside of the building about issues, but to be inside of the building and say, hey, here's what we need from you, here's what we expect. And I think it's a good move. Well, there's a couple things that we already have in place. So if there's any concerns related to police conduct, we haven't dismissed those things. Our internal affairs investigators will still accept complaints. That just goes without saying. But when you're talking about individuals on this particular task force, we'll have roughly 20 members will be allocated towards this. Those members are out in the community, and they are now our eyes and our ears about issues that may affect the LGBTQ community, that may affect the Black community, Hispanic community, whatever that cross-section is, even within our religious institutes. Those concerns will come into us, not as a complaint, but for a consideration or just for an awareness for us to do something about it. Everything doesn't have to come in as a formal complaint. This is part of this, the idea behind building this task force. We don't want to keep taking a reactive approach to our policing practices. We need to take a proactive approach to all of our practices. That was one of the premises which I accepted this office, to come in and be proactive about security measures, invest millions of dollars into school safety. It's no different for what we're doing now within community engagement. Yeah, I don't think it's a matter of credibility for the organization or me as the sheriff of this agency. Let's be clear about what occurs in this process. If you paid attention to what's been echoed across this country, not just here in Broward County, one of the major issues we have as administrators, whether you're a sheriff or a chief of police, is even when you take a very objective approach, a fair approach, and discipline all the way up to terminating an employee, there's an arbitration process that occurs where an individual has an opportunity to present their case one more time, so to speak, and that's outside of my control. One of the things from Black Lives Matter, members who are part of this task force now had discussed the importance of how do we fix the arbitration process. Sheriff, we see what you're doing. You're handling things and your responsibilities and the issues that I can control within the powers afforded to me. But how do you control the arbitration? And that's something that is a contractual aspect. It's also a legislative standpoint, because there's a lot of rights afforded. And I'm sure the judge can elaborate on some of these things as well, because he's chairman of our Professional Standards Committee. But I think what the most important part that the community wants to see, and I think they understand legality, they understand processing, but they want to see strong leadership. They want to know, are you going to slap people on the wrist and turn your eyes away from wrongdoings? Are you going to have the moral courage to look into the community, look into this agency, hold the agency and the personnel accountable, and also be fair in terms of supporting the law enforcement personnel out there when they do their job right? I said this a long time ago. I'll be the first to stand in front of these microphones and tell you when we're wrong, but I'm most certainly going to stand here and tell you when we are right.
Just a few things to reiterate what the sheriff has talked about with the task force. There's a lot of people that are not up here from the neighborhood support team that put a lot of sweat equity into this. There's a reason why this has not been done on a large scale with a lot of other law enforcement agencies, because it takes a lot of manpower. So credit to the sheriff for putting the neighborhood support team in place to create something like this for the first time in BSO history. The whole premise of this task force, the people that you see standing behind us, these are key people from the community who have been very active. They've been out there on the forefront putting in work in the community. And what better time than now to have them have a seat at the table. We often have meetings where we hear from the community, we take in the concerns, we mitigate those issues, and then we wait till the next incident happens, and then we're back at the table. So a very important question was asked by the community. We need to do this more often. Why can't we do this more often? We love meeting with you, but put us to work. We want to be here on a regular, consistent basis. We want to be able to get out there and help you. We can't help advocate for you if we don't know what it is that you do on a regular basis. So the premise behind this task force, or I would say the goal behind the task force, is collaboration. Not just law enforcement, BSO talking at people in the community, but also hearing from the community. Coming together every other month, in which we'll meet the third Tuesday of every other month, and we will take in community concerns. There'll be a training component where we'll have specialized units come out and talk to the people on the task force. So it'll be mini micro sessions of just information sharing. How does our homicide unit function? Crime scene, training, sharing things that these people behind us can be the best advocates, and taking that back to the community to say, you know what, now that I've spent some time there, this is what I do know, how they actually do function. And in turn, we're taking in concerns from their organizations and their communities, and we're helping solve small, it can be anywhere from a small problem to something on a large scale. But I do know when small things go unchecked, that's when they become major. So our goal here in Broward County is not to wait till our city's burning down before we address the problem. We want to be on the forefront, so not if, but when something does happen, we have a coalition of people to call together and stand shoulder to shoulder with and work collaboratively in the community.